that book, the one that you're reading right now, out of all the books that you could have picked, why did you pick that book? What was the reason? I have read a couple of books in my time, and I have picked those books for different reasons. Sometimes it's a recommendation, sometimes it's a sequel or the 14th book in a series that I'm reading. There's a time in my life where I spent 7 to 10 days away from home, or I'd sit on a mountain for Army National Guard or something like that. And so I would spend my time reading books, and I would go to the bookstore and pick the biggest book that I could, because I figured if I'm paying $7.99 for a book, if I can get a 1,000-page instead of a 200-page book, that's value there to me. So all kinds of different reasons I have picked books. I'm interested in why do you pick the book, the one that you're reading right now. Sometimes I go to a movie, and this is one of my favorite ways, and if I'm watching a movie that I really enjoy, I'll go and I'll see, is that movie based on a book? And I'll go buy the book. I mean, who wasn't sitting in the movie theater watching The Revenant, and you went online and you ordered that book while you're sitting there in the movie theater? You know what I'm talking about, right? And if you don't, I think you should read The Revenant and go watch the movie too. They were both pretty great. But this is a video about 4 books that I read, and what is the thread, the connection between these 4 books, and do I recommend these books to you? I'm Captain Mike. This is Whiskey and Witerature, and I talk about whiskey and books, and today it is 4 books. So I'm watching this movie. It's called Lawless, starring Tom Hardy. I realized it was a true story. I go online, and sure enough, it's got a book. So I order that book, The Wettest County in the World by Matt Bondurant, and I read it. A little while later, we were at my oldest son's house, and he has somewhat of a man crush on Tom Hardy, and he suggested that we watch Legend. I go online, and I see that it is also a true story, and there is a book, and despite its not awesome reviews, I went ahead and ordered The Prof of Violence, The Rise and Fall of the Kray Twins by John Pearson. And I read it. So then I got thinking, now I have 2 books starring Tom Hardy, or that were adapted into the movies starring Tom Hardy. What other movies has Tom Hardy done that was a true story? And I thought about Warrior, one of his older movies, and I thought maybe that was a true story. So I go online and nope, it's not. But after a little search, I find another movie that Tom Hardy starred in that was a true story, and it comes from a book. And that movie and the book is called Bronson by Charles Bronson. So now I have 3 books that were about 3 stories that were adapted into movies starring Tom Hardy. And I was flipping through Bronson, and I realized that he is into prison art. And one of the drawings that he drew depicts Charles Bronson in his prison cell with his library. And I found a couple of those books pretty interesting. One is called Bronson by Charles Bronson. So that was a little mind-bending, right? So I'm reading a book. Inside this book, there is a picture of the book that I'm reading. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then another book, another title piqued my interest on that picture. And it was a book called My Story by Ron Kray. So, they weren't really awesome reviews for this book. So I thought maybe I can get myself, I went online and I looked, and sure enough, it is an autobiography. And I thought, cool, now I can get 2 kind of stories about these stories, and then 2 autobiographies that these movies, some of them were based on. So sure enough, I found My Story by Ron Kray, and I ordered it. So then I had 4 books about 3 stories, and those were adapted into Tom Hardy movies. And for me, that's enough to get me to read these series of books. And honestly, like my wife, she's smarter than me, and she said, Mike, maybe you should review books that people want to read. And I'm like, well, she's not wrong. But I wanted to read these books, and so let's go through them in the order that I read them, and I'll tell you if I recommend them to you or not. First up, we have The Wettest County in the World. First published in 2008, my copy has 302 pages, and it is the story of the three Bondurant brothers who were bootlegging moonshine in Virginia during and after Prohibition. And this is the book that really started it all. I thought it'd be pretty cool, like it would bridge that gap between the whiskey and the Witerature. And a super cool thing about it, this book specifically, it is written by Matt Bondurant. And he is the grandson of Jack Bondurant, one of the Bondurant brothers in the story. In the book, we have two interwoven stories, one about the Bondurant brothers and then one about Sherwood Anderson. And Sherwood Anderson, he was a novelist and a journalist. Initially, I was confused and kind of annoyed that his story was also woven into the book. But then I realized that Matt Bondurant didn't have a whole lot of information about his grandfather and granduncles. And so he used a lot of Sherwood Anderson's information to weave his story. And also Sherwood Anderson, he did begin to pique my interest because I realized he was a contemporary of Hemingway, Fitzgerald, and Faulkner, all of whom I've read some of their books in the past couple of years. In fact, this year I've read a Hemingway and a Faulkner. And so that was kind of interesting to me. I've never read any of Sherwood Anderson books, but if you had any dealings with any of his books, whether good or bad, let me know. And if you have one to recommend to me to read or to not read, feel free to drop it in the comment section below. And this book is the easiest of these four to read, simply because it is the only one that considers itself a novel. I will say you do need to pay attention to the chapter headings because it does jump back and forth in different time frames. It's not that difficult to tell, but it was a little confusing to me at first if you're not paying attention to the chapter headings. Typically when we go back from the Bondurant brothers to Sherwood Anderson, that's when the time jumps. And I found this to be a fascinating read. I think we, as a general population these days, we are far removed from violence for the most part, and especially casual, deadly violence. And it's not so for the hills of Virginia a century ago. I didn't exactly find The Wettest County in the World to be an awesome read, but it's pretty great. And so if you're like me, you have an interest in whiskey and Witerature, then this might be a worthy read. And for me, this would be a recommend. Okay, next up we have The Prof of Violence, and this is the rise and fall of the Kray twins. It first was published in 1972. My copy has 326 pages. And this tells the story of the identical twins, Ronnie and Reggie Kray, and they ruled London's gangland in the 1960s. This is written by John Pearson. He was an English novelist and biographer. And we start with the Kray twins' parents, and then we go all the way through their trial and imprisonment. And despite the fact that I think it's fantastic material, it's not an awesome read. It's rather dry. It kind of reads not quite like a textbook, but it's more like an extended newspaper article or a magazine expose. It is that same casual violence. It's this disregard for the norms of society. It's these people who lack the fact that normal people like us, we don't actually want to go to prison. And so we have something that, for the most part, inhibits us from acting out perhaps some urges and impulses that we have. And people like the Bondurant brothers and the Kray brothers just don't have that. It was really, it was amazing to me that a couple of thugs, one of them is literally certifiable, that they could take it to this level and just dominate so much for so long. It was unbelievable to me. Honestly, this book, it's very detailed and thorough. It is a worthy read. And for me, it is a recommend to you, with the caveat that it doesn't read like a novel. It's more like a documentary. So if that's something you're interested in, I think it is a worthy read. Okay, next up is Bronson. This was first published in 2000. My hard copy has 352 pages, and this details the life of one Charles Bronson, a serial convict of Her Majesty's prisons. This is written by Charles Bronson himself and Robin Ackroyd. And Charles Bronson has spent like 28 plus years in solitary confinement. And it shows. He's a prolific writer. He, believe this or not, he has more than 15 titles on Amazon. This is one of the craziest books I have ever read. It is unbelievable. Bronson, he revels in his hostility towards his jailers. He gets off on it. And he doesn't spare himself or make excuses in his books. One of his favorite things to do is to climb on top of a jail and spend a couple days up there throwing slates down at the people below and tearing up everything on the roof until he gets hungry enough to go back down. He is so dangerous that he spends almost his entire time in prison in solitary or being shuttled between prison and to prison because the governor doesn't want to deal with him. But luckily for us, between his recountings of mayhem and madness, we have a lot more examples of his prison art inside these pages. And I'll put some of them up for you as I talk through the rest of this book. And I don't know what you would expect if you've ever delved into the world of prison art, but I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't really this. So I don't know why I expected anything different than these pictures that I'm going to put up on the screen. It's a raucous read. Bronson, he thinks highly and lowly of himself. I truly cannot understand persons like this. I think that Bronson, on a level, he understands the predicament he's in, but he's just caught in this cycle and doesn't know how to break out of it. The book does read like you're sitting with Bronson at an English pub having a pint. It is very colloquial. I found it at times, again, because I can't understand it, I found it at some points to be hard to read. I wonder how he could throw it all away. How could a person be so stupid? I mean, he had a job. He had a beautiful wife. He had a child. And then he just, on impulse, decides to spend a week playing stick-em-up at stores with a shotgun. And then he just spends almost the rest of his life in prison. I tell you what, I think if you can find this book, and this was an old library book, I don't know if someone stole it or the library sold it at some point from England. I think if you can find this book, it is a worthy read. It's interesting, but prepare yourself for a wild, wild ride. Last up, we have My Story by Ron Kray. This was first published in 1973. It's the smallest. My copy has 174 pages, and this outlines the life of Ron Kray, one of the Kray twins. This was written by Ron Kray and Fred Dinenage, and this short book was done, I believe, in response to The Profession of Violence by John Pearson. 1972, this came out, this short book, in 1973. And Ron Kray actually cites John Pearson and this book in this book and disputes some of the things that John Pearson says in this book inside this book. Just the clearest example, John repeatedly refers to Ron as a homosexual, and Ron disputes that and says, no, he's a bisexual. And whether that makes a big difference in today's world, I don't think so. But if you think about the time that he lived and the kind of guy he would be when he wrote this book, it makes sense that he would maybe want to be identified as that. But that's just one of the examples of him citing this book and disputing the things that he said. I think if you want to know where the truth lies between these two books, just read them both and then, well, you can decide. This book is a lot less chaotic than Bronson. I mean, you can just look at the covers here and you know that this book is going to be crazy. I mean, this guy looks like he's just, I don't know, different. The back photographs, I mean, you choose this one versus this one. I mean, Ron Kray spent most of his life, well, it was a lot more of his life outside prison than Charles Bronson did. And he had a very different life. They had a lot of money. They had the things that they wanted. And he had, compared to Bronson, this is a much drier read. It's not quite boring, but almost there. Ron Kray, I think he accepted his illness, his mental illness. And he took he was heavily medicated for a long time. And I think that shows between this book and this book. It's just completely different people. I do think that, like a lot of autobiographies, Ron does try and paint himself in a better light through this work. It is the same violence though. Like, you read this, and again, I'm just through all of these books. I don't have this. If you came to my house at night, okay, my violence level would rise. But on a day-to-day basis, other than yelling at cars on the freeway, I'm pretty docile, pretty sedentary. Not these guys. You know, if they wanted it, if you looked at them the wrong way, that's all it would take for him to punch your face in. It was, I just don't understand these guys. The medications that he took did do him a lot of wonders. Overall, I'm really glad this book isn't quite that long. I found it rather boring. I was bored sometimes. And to me, this is, of these 4 books, is the only one I'm not really going to recommend that you read. Now, Ron Kray does have another book that he wrote with his brother Reggie. It's called Our Story. And Reggie Kray, and I haven't read either one of these books, Reggie Kray also wrote his own autobiography as well. But for me, My Story by Ron Kray is not a recommend. Like 2 sentences about the movies. I think Legend, which this book here was based on this book, and then Lawless, which was based on this book. They're both, you know, Hollywood blockbusters, and they're easy to watch. And you know, if you like those kind of movies, and if you have a man crush on Tom Hardy, I think you should watch it. Bronson is a completely different movie. It is as chaotic, as insane, and incomprehensible as the book is. I cannot recommend that you watch Bronson. But Lawless and Legend, sure, give them a go. These books overall, I enjoyed reading them because of that thread through them. Again, my wife thinking I should read books that people want to read, and that makes a lot of sense. But I do read books sometimes like these, just super interesting. I think if you're interested in crime, in gangs, in prison, and things like that, if you have mental health, that you're interested in that, like violent, if you're into forensic psychology and things like that, these would be kind of a fascinating read. And a couple of them, I think especially the Wettest County in the World, would be interesting to those who are into, again, whiskey and Witerature. So that's my thoughts on these books, guys. I'm glad to have read them, and I think some of them you should too. If you've enjoyed the video, like it, subscribe to see more of my content. Again, I do both whiskey and book reviews. But for now, my friends, you know what to do. I hope you're reading something good and drinking something great, and wear a damn hat.